On the humanitarian situation in Gaza, I think it's first important to remember a fundamental issue that makes this complicated. Hamas continues to use civilians as human shields, something that's not new, something that they've always done, intentionally putting civilians in harm's way to protect them, to try to protect themselves or protect their infrastructure or protect their weapons. So that's one of the basic facts that Israel has to deal with. And of course, civilians should not be used in any way as the targets of military operations. They are not the target of Israel's operations. We did discuss ways to address the humanitarian needs of people living in Gaza, to protect them from harm while Israel conducts its legitimate security operations to defend itself from terrorism and to try to ensure that this never happens again. We also talked about possibilities for safe passage for civilians who want to leave or get out of the way in Gaza, and that's a conversation, a discussion that we will pursue in the coming days, including with some of the countries that we'll be visiting. So this is important, and this is an area for focus. With regard to the $6 billion, first, again, it's always worth repeating the facts because, unfortunately, the facts get lost along the way. The money that Iran accrued in bank accounts, in this case in South Korea, for the sale of its oil was done pursuant to an arrangement established by the previous administration, the Trump administration. None of the funds that have now gone to Qatar have actually been spent or accessed in any way by Iran. Indeed, funds from that account are overseen by the Treasury Department, can only be dispensed for humanitarian goods, food, medicine, medical equipment, and never touch Iranian hands. We have strict oversight of the funds, and we retain the right to freeze them.
Next question goes to Gil Tamery with Channel 13.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much. Gil Tamery, Channel 13 as well. The President compared rightfully Hamas' horrendous massacre to ISIS. Can you provide assurance to Israel that the Biden administration will not attempt to halt Israel's effort until the goal of eliminating Hamas from Gaza is completely achieved, regardless of how long it may take? And with your permission, second question, if Hezbollah opens a second front in the north, can we expect that, if needed, the U.S. will use its military assets in the region to fight against Hezbollah together with the IDF?
Okay. Thank you. With regard to the first question, the President's been very clear. I've been very clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel in its determination to defend its people, defend its country. We stand with Israel in its determination to do everything possible to ensure that what happened on Saturday never happens again. And in that determination, we are, of course, as you know, providing assistance as requested by Israel for its efforts. That will continue, and we're working closely with Congress to make sure that Israel has what it needs to do what it must. With regard to the second front, as I mentioned earlier, it's our determination and that of Israel as well that there not be a second front or a third front. And we are working as hard as we can, working with other partners in the region to try to ensure that that's the case. The President has also been very clear, President Biden. He's been very clear that no one, state or non-state actor, should try to take advantage of this moment. And he's backed up that warning with the deployment of our largest carrier group, the Gerald R. Ford, as well as, again, making sure that Israel has what it needs and that we also have appropriate assets in place. Beyond that, I'm not going to speculate on future events.
For the next question, Ed Wong with the New York Times.
Hi, thank you, Secretary Blinken. Many people have likened the horrendous violence by Hamas to the attacks of 9/11 in the U.S. As you know, the U.S. earned lots of goodwill after those attacks, and there were many expressions of solidarity for the U.S. from around the world. But soon afterwards, the U.S. squandered that goodwill when it began its invasion of Iraq. And now, decades onward in retrospect, the most lasting consequences of 9/11.
All right, so that, of course, is the press briefing where the American Secretary of State, who is presently in Israel, was answering questions. He's again very stoutly insisted that the Americans stand firmly with the Israelis and that the state of Israel has got the American back. And it now remains to be seen as to how things, of course, proceed from here.
And whether it has gotten any closer to those goals with these attacks.
Thanks, Ed. First, let me say this with regard to 9/11. If you look at this in proportion to the size of Israel's population, this is the equivalent of 10 9/11s. That's how big and how devastating this attack has been. And of course, each of these situations is very different, and it's important to keep that in mind. Of course, we're always trying to draw the lessons.
So it remains to be seen as to how the United States, of course, intends to mediate in this, because so far we've not heard anything from the United States of America, the country that has got the most amount of leverage on the state of Israel, about the possibility of a ceasefire. Because as the death toll continues to mount and the humanitarian disaster continues to get worse, because remember, there are different nations that are trying to pull their weight behind to try and bring things back under control, to make the leaders, of course, see some reason. But at this moment, the United States of America, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, he's had his conversations with the Israeli Prime Minister. But there's very little in terms of concrete terms as to what the timelines could be, when talks could begin, when negotiations could happen, because so far it's all been about the United States of America backing the campaign of Israel, of air raids to the hill to try and wipe out Hamas. But also remember, at this moment as we speak, there are bombs that are raining down from the skies on the Gaza Strip. Now, Israel says that it is going after Hamas, but it is doing this not with precision strikes. It is doing this with these heavy bombs that weigh at least about 2,000 pounds that are being dropped in some of the most densely populated region. This is one of the most densely populated region anywhere in the world. And the collateral damage, the deaths of civilians, is expected to be enormous. And also the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also addressing the Knesset. Let's in fact listen in to what he has to say.
עמדנו באין ספור מבחנים. ידענו סבל, ידענו מחוב, יותר אולי מכל עם אחר. אבל מעולם לא נכנענו. כוח הרצון ויכולת העמידה הם שמות נרדפים לעם ישראל. גם במבחן הנוכחי נעמוד, הגם שהוא קשה מנשוא. השבת של 7 באוקטובר.
So that was the Israeli Prime Minister there, Benjamin Netanyahu, who at this moment is facing a lot of questions. Questions are being asked as to how this assault by Hamas took place under Benjamin Netanyahu's watch. This has been described as the worst intelligence failure and the military failure on the part of the Israelis, where at this moment as we speak, at least about 1,300 Israelis have ended up losing their lives in the aftermath of the incursion by Hamas. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.